The dying light of a Tuesday evening stretched long and gold across Sebastian Hawthorne's penthouse office, the last of the sun catching the sharp edge of the contract that lay open on his desk. At 38, he commanded a $14 billion empire that bore his father's name. Yet in this particular silence, with the city glittering 40 floors below him, he felt the specific exhaustion of a man who had won everything and understood none of it. His fingers moved to the mahogany armrest of his chair, the same chair his father had sat in the day he handed Sebastian the keys to Hawthorne Global. He stared at the document before him. Not a divorce filing. Something colder. A marriage proposal, drafted by his own legal team, addressed to a woman he had never spoken to. Mr. Hawthorne. His assistant's voice cut through the intercom, careful and even. Legal is assembled in the boardroom. Mr. Crane's people are expected within the hour. Sebastian pressed the response button without looking up. 2 minutes. He rose, straightening the lapels of his navy suit, armor really the same way it had always been armor, and moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city spread beneath him in shades of copper and fading rose, indifferent and magnificent. Somewhere in it, a woman named Nia Brooks was sitting in a hospital corridor, or a sparse apartment, or perhaps a coffee shop, carrying a piece of paper in her pocket that Sebastian did not yet know existed. The manila folder on his desk contained everything his investigators had assembled in 72 hours. Nia Brooks, 29. Former senior research associate at Vance Biotech, terminated 6 weeks ago under a misconduct allegation that his legal team had already flagged as fabricated. Brilliant academic record. No family wealth. Medical debt accumulating at a rate that suggested something serious, though the specifics remained sealed. His head of legal, Thomas Reed, had placed her file on top of a stack of 12 candidates and said simply, "This one is different, sir. She won't be bought, but she can be reasoned with. And she's desperate enough to say yes." Sebastian had studied her photograph for a long time. Composed. Watchful. Eyes that carried something he couldn't immediately categorize. Not fear, not ambition. Something quieter and more final than either. He had circled her name. What the file did not tell him, what no investigator's report could have surfaced from sealed medical records and a woman too proud to tell anyone, was that Nia Brooks had received her final prognosis 8 days ago. 18 months. Possibly less. She wasn't going to accept his contract for the money. She was going to accept it because Hawthorne Global's pharmaceutical litigation division was the one door left in the world that could open the files she needed before she ran out of time. Sebastian Hawthorne was about to purchase a wife. He had no idea she was already saying goodbye. The will had been read once before, the morning they buried his father. Sebastian had sat in the front row of that oak-paneled attorney's office, composed and unreadable while grief detonated quietly behind his sternum, and he had listened to every clause, every condition, every carefully worded instruction Richard Hawthorne had left behind. He had been certain he understood all of it. He had been wrong. Thomas Reed placed the document on the desk at 7:43 on a Wednesday morning, and he did not sit down. That alone told Sebastian everything. In 11 years, Thomas had never delivered news standing up. "There is a secondary clause," Thomas said. Subsection 9, Addendum C. It was filed separately from the primary will and only becomes binding upon a direct challenge to executive succession. He paused. Victor Crane's legal team filed that challenge at market open this morning. Sebastian read the clause once. Then again. The words did not change. The chief executive seat of Hawthorne Global Enterprises shall transfer to the named successor only upon the condition of lawful marriage. In the absence of a spouse, executive authority reverts to majority board vote within 60 days of verified challenge. 60 days. He set the paper down with the controlled precision of a man resisting the urge to put his fist through the window. Outside, the city was already moving, indifferent and enormous, while somewhere across town Victor Crane was no doubt sitting in a leather chair, smiling, watching Hawthorne Global shares bleed out in real time. Down 11% at open. 17 by mid-morning. The board's group thread, forwarded to Sebastian by his assistant, contained one word from 3 different directors. Concerned. Concerned. His father's life's work, his mother's inheritance, the employment of 9,000 people across 4 continents, reduced to a board thread expressing that it was concerned. Begin the search, Sebastian said. His voice betrayed nothing. Quietly. No agencies. No public channels. I want candidates who are intelligent, discreet, and financially pressured enough to be reasonable. I want a name on my desk by Friday. Thomas nodded and left without another word. Sebastian turned back to the window. 60 days. He had rebuilt a collapsing Asian market division in 45. He had survived a federal audit in 30. He could find a wife in 60. What he could not account for, what no timeline and no legal strategy could have prepared him for, was that the name Thomas would place on his desk Friday morning belonged to a woman with 18 months left to live. And she was already planning to use him. The paper was exactly 1 page long. Nia had expected more somehow. More words, more columns of data, more of the careful medical language that physicians use to build distance between themselves and what they were actually saying. But Dr. Okafor had placed a single sheet before her, and the most important number on it was 18, and beneath that number, in parentheses, were 2 words that Nia had been quietly rehearsing for weeks. Possibly less. She read it, folded it in half, then in quarters, and pressed it into the inside pocket of her coat, directly against her chest, the way you'd keep something precious. Dr. Okafor was still talking. Treatment options, clinical trials, a specialist in Boston whose name she was already writing on a prescription pad, and Nia nodded at the correct intervals, her face composed, her hands absolutely still in her lap. She had learned stillness from her mother. Don't let them see the wound, Clara Brooks used to say. Not because you're ashamed of it. Because it's yours. Outside the consultation room, the hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and recycled air. Nia walked through it the way she walked through everything now, deliberately, cataloging details, storing them. The way afternoon light fell through the lobby windows. The sound of a child laughing somewhere on the pediatric floor above. She was 29 years old and she had recently begun memorizing ordinary things. 6 weeks ago, Vance Biotech had walked her out of the building with a security escort and a fabricated misconduct report. 6 weeks before that, she had found the buried trial data. Falsified efficacy records, suppressed adverse event reports, a compound that had been quietly tested on a research cohort that included, she had eventually understood, herself. She had taken the files. They had taken her career. She was halfway down the front steps of the hospital when her phone rang. Unknown number. A man's voice, measured and professional, identifying himself as Thomas Reed of Reed and Associates, legal counsel for Hawthorne Global Enterprises. Ms. Brooks, he said, we'd like to meet with you at your earliest convenience regarding a private proposal. She almost laughed. She almost hung up. She stood on the hospital steps with the folded prognosis against her heart and the evidence that could destroy Vance Biotech locked in an encrypted drive at home, and she thought about her mother, and she thought about 18 months. Tomorrow, she said. 9 o'clock. She didn't yet know that the man behind that meeting was about to hand her the one key she had been missing. She didn't yet know that walking into that office would change everything. What she knew was simpler, and more dangerous than either. She had nothing left to lose. Sebastian had conducted thousands of negotiations. He knew, within the first 90 seconds of any meeting, exactly how it would end. He read people the way other men read balance sheets, quickly, precisely, without sentiment. So when Nia Brooks walked into the boardroom at 9:03, He assessed her in the time it took her to cross the room. Composed. Underdressed for the setting, deliberately so. A woman who had decided not to perform. Her eyes moved once around the room, noting the exits, he realized, not the art, before settling on him with an expression he had not encountered in recent memory. Complete indifference. He gestured to the chair across from his. She sat without thanking him for it. Ms. Brooks. He slid the preliminary document across the table. I'll be direct. I require a wife for a minimum of 6 months. The arrangement is contractual, private, and mutually beneficial. In exchange for your cooperation, I'm offering full medical expense coverage, a monthly allowance, and a settlement of $4 million upon clean dissolution. He watched her read. Most candidates, by this point, had already started calculating. Nia's expression didn't shift by a single degree. I don't want the allowance, she said. Or the settlement. Sebastian paused. In 11 years, no one had declined $4 million in the first 60 seconds. Then what do you want? She looked up from the document and met his eyes with a directness that did something unexpected to the air in the room. Full access to Hawthorne Global's pharmaceutical litigation division. Every file, every deposition, every sealed settlement from the past decade. Unrestricted. The silence that followed was long enough to be its own kind of conversation. Sebastian studied her face, searching for the angle, the tell, the fracture point where the real request lived. He found nothing. She held his gaze without blinking, without apology, without the faint anxiety that power was supposed to produce in people sitting across from him. That's an unusual ask, he said carefully. You have an unusual problem, she replied. He should have pushed. Should have demanded the reason, the context, the why behind a request that made no sense for a woman supposedly drowning in debt. Every instinct that had built his empire told him to pull the thread before he agreed to anything. Instead, he uncapped his pen and initialed the modification clause. She signed 3 minutes later. So did he. The contract was witnessed, dated, and sealed before either of them said another word. Neither looked at the other when they stood. Neither told the other the truth. And neither of them noticed, in that careful armored silence, that they had just signed something that would crack them both wide open, or that the pharmaceutical files Nia had just been granted access to contained a name that would detonate everything Sebastian thought he knew about his father's empire. She moved in on a Thursday with 2 suitcases and a locked hard drive that she carried by hand, separately, the way you'd carry something irreplaceable. Sebastian's housekeeper had prepared the guest suite. Nia thanked her with genuine warmth, the first unguarded expression Sebastian had seen on her face, and then closed the door, and he didn't see her again until nearly midnight. She was already at the dining table, files spread around her laptop in a constellation only she could read, a cup of tea gone completely cold at her elbow. He said nothing. Neither did she. By the end of the first week, Sebastian had catalogued the following. She slept between 2 and 5 hours a night. She ate half of everything placed in front of her and seemed to do so only when she remembered that she should. She was always the last light on in the penthouse and always the first one up. She moved through his home like someone passing through a place they had never expected to be. Not ungrateful, just untethered, as though she had stopped making herself comfortable in spaces a long time ago. He told himself he noticed because observation was professional habit. He almost believed it. On the 9th day, he came home at 11:30 from a board emergency to find the penthouse dark except for the study. He pushed the door open and stopped. Nia was slumped forward over her files, her cheek pressed against a printed spreadsheet, one hand still loosely curled around a pen. Asleep, genuinely, deeply asleep, in the involuntary way of a body that had simply stopped negotiating. He stood there longer than was necessary. The files beneath her arms were angled away, edges carefully overlapping, protected even in unconsciousness. He could see the Vance Biotech letterhead on one corner before her sleeve obscured it. He lifted her with the same careful precision he applied to everything, and felt, without expecting to, how light she was. Not delicate, diminished. The specific lightness of a person running on will alone. He placed her on the bed, pulled the blanket across her shoulders, and stood in the doorway for a long moment in the dark. The feeling in his chest had no name he was willing to give it. He returned to the study. The files were still there. He could have looked. He had legal access to everything in his own home, every document, every encrypted folder. His hand rested on the edge of the nearest paper. He walked away. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known standing in that doorway watching her sleep, was that the spreadsheet beneath her cheek contained a transaction record linking Vance Biotech's falsified trial directly to a Hawthorne Global subsidiary account. His father's account. She found it at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, and she made no sound at all. The shell company had been buried with genuine sophistication. 3 layers of offshore holding structures, 2 dormant subsidiaries, and a Luxembourg registration that would have stopped most forensic accountants cold. But Nia had spent 4 years tracking Vance Biotech's financial architecture from the inside, and she recognized the signature the way you recognize a voice in a crowd. The same pattern, the same deliberate obfuscation, the same fingerprints underneath different gloves. Crane Capital Partners, a Victor Crane entity incorporated 18 months before the falsified trial began, had funneled $40 million into Vance Biotech's research division through a series of transactions designed to look like standard venture disbursements. In exchange, buried in a licensing addendum she almost missed, Crane held exclusive commercial rights to any compound developed from the trial data. The trial that had poisoned her. Nia sat back in her chair and pressed both hands flat against the desk, steadying herself against something that wasn't quite rage and wasn't quite grief but lived in the territory between them. Victor Crane, the same man currently dismantling Sebastian's company from the outside, had financed the research that was killing her from the inside. She saved the file in 3 separate locations, closed her laptop, and sat in the dark for a long time. She did not go to Sebastian. Across the penthouse, Sebastian was reading a different document entirely. His private investigator, Marcus Webb, had flagged the anomalies 3 days ago and spent the intervening time verifying before presenting. The report was thorough and deeply uncomfortable. Nia's medical records were sealed beyond standard privacy protocols, the kind of sealing that required legal intervention, not just a privacy request. Her termination from Vance Biotech had been preceded by an internal security escalation that Webb had traced to the company's executive board. The pharmacy charges on her personal account over the past 4 months corresponded, with grim precision, to a palliative care regimen. Sebastian read the last line twice. Recommend immediate full medical disclosure request. Pattern consistent with terminal diagnosis. Actively managed. He set the report down. Outside, the ocean moved in the dark, indifferent and vast. Down the hallway, a light was still on under Nia's door. He thought about the way she memorized sunsets. The way she ate like someone who had stopped planning ahead. The way she'd signed his contract without a single question about the future. He picked up his phone and called Webb. "I want her complete medical history," he said quietly. "Everything. However long it takes and whatever it costs." He paused. "And Marcus, she doesn't find out." He ended the call. Neither of them slept that night. 12 feet and 1 closed door apart, Sebastian and Nia sat separately with the wreckage of what they'd just discovered. Each holding a piece of the same devastating puzzle, neither knowing the other had just turned over a matching piece. And somewhere across the city, Victor Crane's phone lit up with a single message. She found the Crane Capital link. Activate contingency. The dress was midnight blue and belonged to a woman comfortable being watched. Nia stood before the mirror in the penthouse bedroom and recognized, with detached clarity, that she looked like someone she used to plan on becoming. Sebastian was waiting in the foyer when she emerged. She watched something move across his face, quick and unguarded, gone before she could name it, and then his expression reset to its usual composed authority and he offered her his arm without a word. The gala occupied the top floor of the Meridian Hotel, all candlelight and cathedral ceilings and the specific performative warmth of people who wielded power in formal wear. Sebastian moved through it like a man in his natural habitat. Measured, magnetic, commanding every room by simply entering it. Nia stayed close, smiled at the correct moments, laughed quietly at things board members said, and understood viscerally for the first time why he had needed someone intelligent for this role. This was not a performance that survived a weak partner. The dancing began at 9. Sebastian turned to her and extended his hand with the formality of a man honoring a contractual obligation, and she took it with the composure of a woman who had decided the same. And then the music started and his hand settled at the small of her back and everything contractual evaporated instantly. They didn't speak for a full minute. They didn't need to. "You're good at this," he said finally, his voice low enough for only her. "At pretending?" She replied. A pause. "I wasn't sure that's what this was." She didn't answer. But she didn't pull away either. Later, the balcony, city lights sprawling below them, the party noise muffled behind glass, Nia stood beside him and felt the words rising in her chest with a terrifying momentum. The diagnosis. The files. The trial. Her mother. All of it pressing upward like something that had been held underwater too long. She opened her mouth. "You look like you're carrying something," Sebastian said quietly, his eyes still on the city. The words dissolved. "I'm fine," she said. He didn't believe her. She could tell by the way he said nothing. She was still standing there, recalibrating, when a hand closed briefly around her elbow from behind. A man she didn't recognize, silver-haired, pleasant-faced, the most dangerous kind of threat, leaned close under the pretense of reaching past her for the railing. "Ms. Brooks," he said softly, pleasantly, like a man commenting on the weather. "Mr. Crane wanted you to know that documents can be destroyed. People can be destroyed more quietly." He paused. "Stop digging. This is the only time anyone will ask nicely." He was gone before she could respond, absorbed back into the party like smoke. Nia gripped the balcony railing and kept her face entirely still. Her heart was detonating behind her ribs. 3 feet away, Sebastian turned back toward her, reading her face with those precise, searching eyes. "Nia." His voice carried a new register. Not the CEO, not the contract, something beneath both. What just happened? She looked at him, really looked at him, and in that single unguarded second understood with complete and devastating certainty that she was falling in love with a man she had never planned to stay for. "Nothing," she said. "We should go back inside." She moved past him before he could see her hands shaking. What she didn't see was Sebastian watching the silver-haired man cut through the crowd below with the focused stillness of someone committing a face to permanent memory. He already had his phone in his hand before the balcony door closed behind her. The file arrived at 6 a.m. in a sealed envelope marked private, addressee only in Marcus Webb's handwriting. Sebastian's assistant left it on his desk without comment. He didn't open it until the morning meetings were done, until the last board call had disconnected, until the office was empty and the city outside his windows had shifted from the hard brightness of midday into the long, honest light of late afternoon. He opened it the way he opened everything. Methodically. Without bracing. He stopped bracing on the 3rd page. Primary diagnosis. Stage 4 hepatic veno-occlusive disease, secondary to toxic compound exposure. Onset consistent with prolonged occupational contact with suppressed agent NB7. Vance Biotech internal classification. The words continued, precise and merciless. Current prognosis. 14 to 20 months from confirmed onset. Accelerated deterioration probable under continued stress conditions. Patient has declined palliative referral twice. Patient has declined grief counseling once. Patient had declined. As though declining were a personality trait and not an act of extraordinary, heartbreaking will. Sebastian set the page down. He sat completely still for a very long time. Outside, the sun continued its descent, painting the office in the same amber and copper tones that Nia stood in sometimes when she thought he wasn't watching. Face tilted slightly upward, eyes somewhere past the glass, storing the light with the careful intentionality of someone who understood it was finite. He had thought it was a habit, a temperament, something quiet and particular to her. It was a goodbye, extended, daily, conducted in plain sight. She had been saying goodbye to everything since before she walked into his boardroom. She had signed his contract with 14 months left on a countdown she hadn't told him was running. She had moved into his home, learned his routines, performed his marriage, and carried her death in her coat pocket like a folded piece of administrative paperwork. And not once, not for a single moment, had she asked him for anything that resembled saving. Something moved through Sebastian's chest that he had no architecture for. Not grief. Not rage. Those were emotions that arrived with a destination. This had no destination. This simply expanded until it occupied everything. He closed the file. He picked up his phone and called the most decorated oncological researcher in the country. A man who owed Sebastian Hawthorne a debt large enough to demand miracles, and spoke for 4 minutes without raising his voice once. Then he called Webb. The compound, he said. NB7. I want to know every laboratory, every researcher, every living person who has ever touched that formula. A pause. And I want to know why Vance Biotech buried it. Webb was quiet for a moment. Sebastian. If this goes where I think it goes, you need to understand. Whoever suppressed that compound had the resources to do it quietly and the motive to keep it quiet permanently. I know, Sebastian said. They'll come for her before they let her testify. I know that too. He ended the call and stood at the window, the file still on his desk behind him. The city indifferent below. Down the hallway, he could hear the faint sound of Nia's laptop keys. Still working, always working, spending her borrowed hours like currency she refused to waste. She had walked into his life with a plan to die in it. He had a different plan entirely. What he didn't yet know, what Webb's next call 40 minutes away would detonate without warning, was that NB7 had not been destroyed. A single viable sample existed, and the only person alive who knew its precise synthesization formula had left it encoded in a research file under a dead woman's name. Her mother's name.
Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of Sebastian and Nia's journey. Their story reminds us that even in a world of cold contracts and high stakes, love is the one thing that can't be bought, but it can certainly save us. If you felt the power of their connection, please leave a red heart in the comments and let us know your favorite moment. Your support means the world to our storytelling family.